I'm Liam.
I'm Wayne.
You're listening to In Film We Trust YouTube,
a place where we post clips from our recent episode.
All links down below in the description.
And now, on with the show.
We do talk a lot about independent filmmakers on this podcast, and Sean Baker is a name that does often come up if you look at like modern day independent cinema.
Unfortunately, I'm not too familiar with Sean Baker. Really big fan of Florida Project. Really loved this film, Red Rocket. But also, interestingly, he had a film called Tangerine.
I've heard of that, yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that the plot involved two transgender women. I think they were sex workers. But more interestingly, that film itself was shot on an iPhone.
Yes.
I mean, I saw the trailer, I saw clips of it. It looked really good for an iPhone. Of course, in post-production, I'm sure there's been things tweaked. The sound wasn't off the iPhone, for example.
Yeah. Well, of course, like Steve Soderbergh, he made Unsane on an iPhone. It's surprising that more filmmakers don't do that, because you can still get good cameras on iPhones, and yeah, it'll cut down shooting costs anyway.
Because Sean Baker also made a film called Starlet. And
yeah.
part of that plot involved the adult film industry, which is where he got speaking to these people in the industry, these actors, which is where this kind of germinated from, those experiences, those conversations, the narcissism, which will be a big theme in this film.
Because he's a director known for his social realism.
Yep.
And if you look up the themes of his films, he often focuses on the outcasts, the marginalised individuals in society. One of the groups is sex workers, which is a recurring theme in his films.
And he never does it in a condescending way.
No, it feels like when he's focusing on them, he's doing so to remove a stigma.
I think when we done Elephant, I used this term, cinema verite.
Yeah.
It's like you're watching life happen. The characters in these films, specifically Red Rocket, because that's what we're talking about, they're not talking about being economically depressed. They're talking about their life as it's lived.
Yeah.
So from a first-person perspective, rather than trying to be, social commentary on it.
Yeah, it's not what you could call... I've heard some movies that focus on, say, people in poverty. It's called poverty porn, where it's everything is so downtrodden. It's the woe is me attitude. But with a film like this, with Red Rocket, they basically just spend all the time just talking about the general things you would in your day-to-day life.
Exactly.
And it's like there's no lamentations.
Exactly. And I think this film was shot in 16mm.
It was shot in 16mm.
16mm for 1.1 million.
Yes. The 16mm gives it this kind of classic home movie vibe. I've read that it's used for grittiness, texture, and a kind of surrealistic look as well.
Surrealistic. Definitely gritty.
Yes, it is
definitely
very gritty.
Yeah.
Interesting lighting as well. Almost like a kind of angelic glow, like when we did Buffalo 66.
Yes.
That kind of glow the characters have as well.
Because this film only had a crew of 10 people, no rehearsal time, and featured mainly non-actors.
Yes, non-professionals. And even the way that those actors were found is a fascinating story. Simon Rex was contacted directly by Sean Baker, who apparently doesn't like dealing with agents, mustn't like middlemen. Called him up, got him to audition over an iPhone, and then Simon Rex came out to Texas to start. Then his agent didn't even know he was doing this.
Brilliant story, because Simon Rex, what was he? A MTV VJ back in the 90s. He was in the Scary Movie films. He was a solo porn actor himself.
Yeah, he actually did a solo masturbation scene in a gay porno, so his casting in this film was someone, I guess you could call it an in-joke.
Well, Sean Baker said he always wanted to work with Simon Rex. Do you think that was specifically because he knew he was going to do this material at some point, and he thought Simon Rex was the perfect fit for it, which he is?
Possibly, maybe this idea had been germinating in his mind for a long time, and he wrote this part and he thought, I know the guy to play this.
But almost serendipitously, this film wasn't actually supposed to be made. It was only made due to COVID.
Yeah, because it was made during the COVID, like with rigorous protocols.
Because he was going to make this more of a social commentary film on drug abuse, drug addicts. But that was going to be too much of a production. So a company said, look, we'll give you such and such, a small amount of money, 1.1 million.
Yeah. If
If you can do something with that, you're free to do that. Which, it's worked out, Wayne.
Yeah, you would not think, looking at this, only $1 million. $1 million, that's about how much John Carpenter's The Fog cost when he made it first time round. And that had effects and makeup and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very stripped down, very kind of bare bones movie. But yeah, they did a lot with $1 million, I think. Even stories, if you look at someone like, we talked about how Simon Rex got into it, Susanna's Son.
Susanna's Son. Funnily enough, she ties into a Gus Van Sant episode in Elephant, because she was in line to see Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot,
Yes.
which is where Sean Baker and his wife actually found her. She was holding a cigarette of her boyfriend while I think he went to the bathroom. And they spotted her. They didn't know she had actually studied acting.
I think she'd not long moved to LA, hadn't
Exactly.
she? And basically, Baker came up to her and gave him a scrap of paper which had his email on it and just said, keep in touch. And it wasn't until years later.
2 years later, I think.
Until this movie was making. So Baker must have a very good eye for these particular people who he wants to cast in these particular roles. It's like he always has these roles in his head and he's just like casting all of the time.
To me, Baker is he's expressing Americana, but he's almost got a European sensibility.
Yeah.
He's going for Mike Leigh.
Yes.
One of Sean Baker's favourite films is Mike Leigh's film Naked, which is a very gritty, very matter-of-fact, very free-flowing film, and I see that in Sean Baker's work.
Those were terms I would use to describe this as well.
And an American comparison of yesteryear would be John Cassavetes, where he would risk all. John Cassavetes and Sean Baker, to me, they're working in the same ballpark. They're exploring the ordinary, the everyday life. They're using non-professionals in many cases, and there's a strong similarity there.
Yes, there's a very down-to-earth, gritty realism about it. It's essentially the idea of just looking at people just living their lives. Like, again, not sensationalized, very naturalistic, which is a word we use quite a lot, I think.
It's almost the anti-Hollywood.
It basically, yes, the anti-Hollywood. Other people who were cast, Brittany Rodriguez, who plays June, and Ethan Darbone. He essentially just seen them around. June was Rodriguez was walking her dog, and Darbone, I believe, worked in a restaurant, and he said he liked their look. So it's almost as if he knew people growing up, and he thought, right, that's a perfect role for them.
Perfect match. Let's see what you're like.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can work with, and it definitely works out.
Also, interestingly, Brittany Rodriguez, also a production assistant on the film, because, like you say, a crew of like 10 people.
Yep.
Is it just a case they weren't allowed too many because, again,
COVID
and social distancing protocols and such?
Which goes to show, do you need all them hangers on, Wayne?
You don't really know.
No.
You can just have a small crew because it's easier to control. It's more contained that way.
Do you know what's a travesty? Not a single Oscar nomination.
No, it didn't get any at all. It wasn't completely ignored. In fact, I'd never even heard of it until you brought it up.
Palme d'Or nomination.
Oh, for the actual Palme d'Or?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Nomination.
Yeah, it does seem like the kind of movie they would go for, that more art house, risk-taking kind of thing.
So the term Red Rocket itself, that could... you could know, but...
Do we have to say this?
Yes, but there's several implications. It's an American slang, of course, for a dog's penis.
Dog's penis, yeah, which is... Okay.
Okay, then there's other parallels here. One of the main female characters is called Strawberry. Strawberries are red, rocket, penis again. Okay, also there's the analogy of this being set in Texas City, Texas. Red state, Republican, red.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's many interpretations, Wayne.
There are very many, yes. Also, you talked about Starlet earlier. I think that's, from what I read, like you say, where the idea came from, because there's a term here, which actually comes up in the film, suitcase pimp.
Suitcase pimps.
Which is essentially men who live off women in the porn industry. They kind of use them to, I'd say, get ahead in the business. Again, a very important element of this film.
Well, a quote from Baker about suitcase pimps is, he said, "I found these men to be fascinating because I was disturbed by them, quite honestly, but also had to know more about them." So you're getting this, okay, they're fascinating, they're disturbing, which ties into our central character of this film, Mikey.